Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest is my good friend, Tom Long. Tom, welcome back to the show for the third time.
Hey, I'm honored, Ross. Thank you. Good friends. You don't get that often from the well-respected Mr. Bentley, so I appreciate that.
Are you saying that I don't have any good friends?
No, I'm very much appreciative of being in that inner circle.
Okay. Yeah. Well, hey, anybody that's willing to, hang out with me on this podcast, they're going to be a good friend, right? Yeah. Yeah. And you and I have obviously spent, more time over the past few years, mostly in and around the coaching things. And I've got some ideas of some things that we could talk about today, but I'm pretty sure nobody listening to this podcast does not know about you and your background. But, Tom, you're one of the winningest drivers in, global MX-5 and IMSA and, different categories, and drove the factory Mazda prototype cars. And you've kind of driven a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot of different things. So I think it'd be really fun to talk to you about, and you do a lot of coaching. So I thought it'd be really interesting for us to talk about driving styles.
Absolutely. That's a lot of fun to think about too. Different drivers, different cars, all those things, and what the differences are for those driving styles.
Well, I've talked to drivers and coaches who say, I don't buy that driving style thing. There's one way to drive a car, period. That's the way you drive it. That's how you go fast. If you don't drive that way, then you're not going to be fast. Your thoughts on that?
Interesting, because I think about different, as you mentioned, getting to be fortunate enough to drive a lot of different types of cars, from prototypes to GT cars to kind of a showroom stock style car. Really, in my mind, they require a bit different driving style because of the platform, the chassis, how it's sprung, how it responds, all those kinds of things. Typically, yes, smooth is fast. That I will always agree with that. But there are certain things that you can do in a prototype that you can't get away with in a showroom stock or even a MX-5 Cup car, if you will.
Well, maybe we should step back and go, what do we mean by style? Because is style, style is not, I'm going to turn the steering wheel with my left kneecap. That's not style, right? That's wrong, but I think it is. But style could be one driver who is more sort of carries more entry speed, flows a lot of speed through the middle of the corner. Another driver might be a little bit more point and shoot, kind of slow it down, coming out of the corner. Is that, and does that fit your definition of what we're talking about with style? That kind of thing?
Certainly does. I was also thinking about hair product underneath the helmet, but yes, that's but yes, absolutely, about your style of how you like to approach and dissect corners, not post dissection, but more like how you would approach a corner, and whether it's a high speed corner, low speed corner, like you say, with more entry speed or you're more of an exit speed. And it depends on the type of corner, of course. But I also think about things like hand speed, just generally, how quick are your hands? Where are your feet when you're steering the car? There are so many different styles, and I'm talking about professional drivers that do this extremely, extremely well. And when you look at it, there is a lot of different ways to make a car go fast, and it's so fascinating to me to see how you see one driver do this, and you're like, that would not work for me, but yet you can get in the same car and do it your way and be within the same 10th, if you will, right? And it's a lot of fun to dissect that. I'm sure, as you can appreciate, looking at data and video and say, well, we end up at the same time in virtually the same car or physically the same car, but yet we got there two different ways.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and that's where I would argue with somebody that says there is only one style. There's the right style. Because I don't agree with that, because I believe I've seen enough where I've seen two drivers drive very differently. And like you said, they're within hundredths of a second of each other driving the same car. And, and maybe what's even more interesting about that is you get two drivers sharing a car in an endurance race, and, the setup is probably not perfect for either one of them. And then they go and drive it differently and still end up with the same result.
It is. And that's always the fun balance of endurance racing. And endurance racing is really my passion for a lot of different reasons. But on the co-driver aspect of it, like you mentioned, it is so much fun to be able to have to, at times, compromise what you feel and think the car should do and someone and your teammate to do. But when you get to it and you put your heads together and you get a really good car under you and you're happy with it, and even if you have to make some adjustments, it really challenges you as an individual to be able to kind of put your best foot forward for the team and make it work. It's I really feel like that is one of the many aspects of endurance racing that is just a lot of fun.
Well, you've done a lot of that, and you've had some pretty amazing fast co-drivers driving. Any stories, any experiences you can kind of share around that without giving away all the secrets, but just differences where you have a co-driver that does something one way and you're going, how does that driver make that work? And because I can't make that work. Have you had that experience? Maybe an example of that?
You stole the thought out of my mind. That is exactly where my head was going with this example. Actually, on the Mazda Motorsport DPI program, and even before the DPI chassis, we were running a P2 chassis, the Lola chassis. A lot of fun years, being competitive and had a lot of great teammates and a lot of great engineers and folks to work with. One comes to mind. Everybody drives a little different, but Tristan Nunez, a great young talent who Ross, pretty well right now.
With Tristan being co-driving with the driver that I'm coaching right now, I've been studying Tristan's driving style very, very close. So Tristan, if you're listening, we won't give away your secrets, but Tom?
Yeah. So I got to be careful about that because I don't need Tristan sending me a message after this one. Man, you gave it all away. But
yeah.
But I will say this. I don't know. I do know the background on Tristan's style. He learned it from a coach growing up. And when he made the transition from go-karts to race cars, he was taught to drive the car this particular way with the steering input specifically that gave him more feel and control of the car, not being in control of the car, but more feel of where the front tire is and where the car is. And he can control his entry speed with steering angle rather than more so with the brake. Obviously you need the brake to slow the car down, but I thought it was so interesting watching his driving with this. And really what triggered it, Ross, was not the video. It was the data. And you see the steering angle trace, and they are so far different from, like, say, my steering angle trace. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I could almost make the leap of faith to do what he does. But you look at the lap time, like we said, and it's virtually the same. No disrespect, Tristan's an amazingly quick driver, and usually he was actually the guy in that regard. I remember being on pole a couple times, and it's like, oh, you just got ousted by the other car. Yeah, your teammate by a tenth. And so Tristan is super fast, and it was fun being able to share the front row in prototype competition in IMSA a couple times with him. But it was done completely different. So for another example of this is at Mosport, right? One of the fastest tracks we go to. And I mean, what is that? That's a 2.5 mile track, and we're lapping in just over a minute. So average speed is absolutely incredible. And he's turning in for turn 2, and the steering wheel does something that you just think, what is going to happen? I mean, it is really riveting to watch.
Well, I would say he asks a lot of the front tires. Would that be your experience?
Yes, but interestingly enough, you would watch this in this qualifying event. When we're separated by a tenth here, and we've got the front row locked out for Mazda. Great, exciting day, and you think, okay, not that you feel like you're better or worse than your teammates, but I think I'm going to save my front tires a little bit more, to your point, by not having so much ask in the front tire. But he goes the whole stint and he doesn't have the front tires falling off. So it makes you think, whatever works. I mean, I didn't go check the tread depth after, not just treaded tires, but, the tire depth indicators after that stint to measure it. But yeah, I think it worked for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen that. He is not hard on the car. He's not hard on the tires, but he's not afraid to ask a lot of the car and the tires. Like it's like, I want to go over there. I'm going to turn the wheel and make it go over there. And I actually believe that, there are drivers who are tentative in asking that much. And it's a tough thing to change.
In Ross, you bring up a good point about being tentative. I'm fortunate to do a lot of coaching and work with a lot of fun clients and different kinds of cars. And I find that the faster the car, the more assertive or aggressive, however you want to look at it, the more assertive you need to be with that car, like from a braking pressure standpoint and from a turning, steering angle and how you do it. And the harder you work the car, the faster the tires come up to temperature, the faster you can go right away. And it is such a fine line, but the faster the car, the bigger the tire typically, and you need that heat to get going. And that was one thing that going back to Tristan, and Tristan, you don't have to pay me too much for this episode, by the way. But he would be able to get the tires in right away because he had so much steering angle in there to almost like you would think cheese grater, but it really would get the heat into the fronts.
Well, and I think it's interesting that we're talking about driving style, and the first thing you go to is you mention hand speed and steering angle. And I think a lot of drivers, you talk about driving style and they immediately think, they're more of a momentum driver, or they're more of a point and shoot driving, or, it's more about braking and it's more about, that kind of thing. And you immediately go to steering. And I don't think a lot of drivers or coaches would that wouldn't be their first thought. It would be the braking, the throttle, how you attack the corner in terms of braking, min speed, getting back out of the corner.
Well, and certainly I agree. I mean, I don't mean to step 10 steps ahead of the basic, but what I guess what I'm getting at is if you look at those components that you just mentioned, right, that very much has to do with car to car, I feel like. And yeah, every driver is going to have that transferred over to whatever car they drive. But those are the subtleties, like you said, point and shoot works great on a high horsepower, low grip car, right? Because you got to take the lateral load out of the car to get it to go down the next straightaway. So different driving styles really do impact which car you're driving, I think, or vice versa, right? So I feel like that's, in my mind, where I would talk about different mentalities to drive a car if it's low lateral grip but has a lot of power, or low power but has a lot of grip, those kinds of things.
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, fellow that I've coached and worked with and been friends with for many, many years, and a good friend of yours is Colin Brown, right? And Colin, I would say, when I think about Colin's driving style, I don't immediately go to the steering wheel. I go to the brake pedal. And honestly, I've never seen a driver, and I've looked at a lot of data from a lot of different drivers. I don't know of a driver in the world who is as good as Colin is releasing the brake pedal. And that's what makes him so good. And his ability to fine tune that corner entry speed to within probably a quarter of a mile an hour and get the car to rotate and then get out of it. I don't know anybody who does that part of the driving better than Colin does. And, but does he ask as much of the tires as Tristan does with the steering wheel? I don't know. So then you kind of got to go, what happens if you put the two of those guys together and then add in your brain?
Well, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I have a huge amount of respect for Colin as well, in that everything he gets in, he is ultra fast, and a great family as well. And I agree with you. The brake pedal to me is the black magic. It is the most underrated thing in the car in a way, because you can manipulate so much with the brake pedal. How you slow the car down, how you stop it from slowing down, how you transition the weight in the car, how you manage the weight. It is so much fun to be able to do the things you're talking about on the release side of the pedal, and how it helps the car point without even really touching the steering wheel too much, right? So it's incredible, like an art, literally, to watch someone who's able to really manipulate the pedals that well and get it to work.
Well, and my secret driving goal, and I'm going to work on this till the day I die, is I want to drive around a racetrack and never turn the steering wheel, and only turn the car with my feet, with how I manage the brake release and the throttle. And obviously that's a bit ridiculous, but the concept of that is something that I find, like, I almost look at the steering wheel as like, well, that's cheating. Anybody can turn the steering wheel and make the car turn, but can you turn it with the brake pedal? Now that's fun. So
absolutely. And
that's an insight into my driving style, right?
I love it, because, I have an immense amount of respect for getting a chance to do different ride and drive programs, or for a manufacturer, what have you, and giving thrill rides. And they, the manufacturer, the tire manufacturer, whoever says, hey, if you want to slide the car a little bit, but be our guest. And it's like, well, twist my arm. And it's incredible, to your point, how much rotation you can get into a car without really touching the steering wheel much. I mean, you can transfer load and get a bit of a pendulum effect going without really making much advancement on the steering wheel. It's really neat.
So Tom, you remind me of, so when I had started up Dirtfish Rally School, and I was around all these rally drivers, and a lot of them would say the steering wheel is just a suggestion. Like, you turn the car with your feet, but you kind of suggest, with a little tiny little steering wheel, you suggest the car go in that direction, and then the rest of it you do with your feet. And I like that concept. But again, yeah, as you're talking about ride and drive and those kinds of demo lap things where you get to just come into the corner, get that brake release, get the whole thing just turning sideways, and you're having just this massive smile. And the person sitting in the car with you is maybe not having the same kind of smile, but maybe more of a nervous smile.
Yeah, well, those are the best folks, is actually when you get folks screaming, having a good time screaming, in the back, as you get a lot of slide and tire noise and all that good stuff. But one other fun opportunity had recently, I was up at Road America for a summer event, and a buddy of mine who's racing, who's kind of transitioned over to dirt sprint cars now, winged 360 and 410 sprint cars.
Real racing.
Yeah, exactly. And he actually was silly enough to let me take a couple laps in the car. And I had a absolute blast, but it is so different. It's a departure from road course racing, how you release the brake and what you do, but a lot of similarities as well, because you look at the brake release and how you almost don't turn the steering wheel. Now, granted, in that particular instance, you have a lot of stagger in the rear tires to help the car rotate. And then you have this massive wing to kind of drive the car into grip into the corner. But there were so many parallels from road course racing, driving, to this sprint car. But yet was so different feel, how you did it, how you sat in the car, the noises and all these components. But it was just really an interesting experience in what you're talking about, brake release, not using the steering wheel too much to get the car to turn in. But after that, you're catching it a whole bunch, right?
Yeah. Whole lot of steering going on at that point. And I don't know if I've ever told you, but that's where I started my racing. My dad worked and built sprint cars, and that's where I first started. My first season was which is probably why that part of it is still so much a part of what I like to do, is that part of it. So,
yeah.
So what is your driving style?
That's a great question. So I would describe myself like this. I got my start in low powered momentum cars, spec Miatas, showroom stock style cars. So it was always a energy conservation mentality, right? Try to use the brake pedal as little as possible, get the car rotated into the corner, and then back to power as early as possible. Obviously, now doing a lot of coaching, sometimes you get a lot of clients and students who are using the gas pedal too soon, and they're actually creating a bunch of understeer out of the corner, which there's a time when you don't touch either pedal, right? We've talked about that a lot, but that was my style growing up, was touch the pedal as little as possible, just conserve the momentum, and then, or the brake pedal, that is, and then back to power. But I think if I had to categorize myself now, having driven a lot more faster cars, mentally, I am always focused on how can I gain entry speed. Obviously, you don't want to hurt the exit, right? And you really got to think about, okay, well, it depends on the type of corner. If I'm working on a slow corner with a long exit onto a straightaway, obviously it's an exit speed corner, but it's really fun for me to work on high speed corners and carry as much entry speed in there as possible, and work on, like you were talking about with Colin, the brake release and how much can you get away with that. So that's where my mentality is when I approach a variety of corners.
So are you a late breaker, or are you an early breaker, or would you say a medium breaker?
Yeah, I would say, and in this would depend on the car I'm in and the comfort level I'm in. If you get an opportunity to drive somebody's car for the first time, probably not going to be the latest one to break in that car, right? Yeah. For the multitude of reasons. But if it's a car that I'm very comfortable with, been driving for a long time, or have to go do a job, if you will, I'd say I'm probably on the late braking side to carry the entry speed. But that doesn't always mean that you got to brake late to carry entry speed. The difference is, I feel like if you brake too early, you get yourself almost from a balance standpoint, right? So when you release the brake, you're really trying to manage the weight on the front tires and how it manages the rear weight to get the car to turn in. And so if you brake sometimes too early, you almost don't get that weight transition you're looking for, right? So it's one of those, it depends. And I don't like to give that kind of answer because
I do.
It's generic, but I find a lot of folks I coach, they can't get the car to respond the way we want it to, because sometimes if they're braking too early, they can't get the brake release right to get the weight managed properly.
Well, and I talk about that as being, you need to have energy in the car when you get to the corner, because if you come to the corner and if you brake too early and then you begin to turn in and you don't really have enough load transfer, the car doesn't respond. The car kind of goes, what do you want me to do? But if you come in there and you brake solidly and left it late enough, and you come in there with some energy in the car is going to respond. And it's kind of like what you're talking about with Tristan, where he works the tires hard enough that the tires then come back and say, give me more, right?
I love it. I like that analogy, leaving energy in it. And I talk a lot about energy in a different way with tires, in that, just recently we're in a car, mid-engine car with a lot of power, and car wanted to move around a lot. And it's like trying to explain to a driver, hey, try to take out as little energy as possible out of these tires by not moving the car around. Every time you slide the car or go to power too much and it slides the car, you're taking energy out of the tire. And if we need this car to last 50 minutes for the race, we need to have something left at the end, right? So it's fun talking about it in those terms, and different light bulbs coming on.
Well, and I think it's probably time to kind of put the caveat in here of it depends. But for example, as you were saying that, I can hear somebody, or think about somebody listening to this and going, "Oh, so I shouldn't slide the tire very much," or somebody hearing, "Well, Tristan Nunez slides the tire a lot, so I should slide the tire." It's kind of all relative. And as an example, fairly recently, a driver told another driver that I was involved with, saying, this corner, you need to have kind of slow hands and really be gentle turning into the corner. And the driver heard that and was like, okay, I got to be really gentle turning in and be really slow hands turning this corner. And then when I found out, I was like, oh, well, and I won't mention the name, but I don't know a driver who turns the wheel more aggressively and harder than this driver. So what's slow hands to him is probably fairly quick hands to a lot of other drivers. So it's all kind of relative. And that's where, you and I talking here, hey, it's all talk. But you need to find kind of your own way, I guess, as well. And just because we say, a smooth brake release, well, smooth compared to what? Smooth compared to Colin Brown? I don't know how you could be smoother, right? A quick release. What does that mean? Compared to what? Compared to your slow release or my slow release? So it's kind of all relative, I think.
Absolutely right. And I don't mean to muddy the waters. My apologies on that.
No, but I think it's important that we just clarify that.
Yeah, agreed. And you bring so much truth to this, because you're right. It is all relative, and sometimes. And I think that's what's so much fun about the technology we have these days, is that we can record so much, not only HD video, but all the data inputs that the car is receiving through, the OBD2 or CAN communication, or just whatever, longitudinal Gs. It's different simple things we can use with data systems. And we can understand so much what a driver's doing. And if another driver is able to reference it, what we call a reference lap or a datum lap, you can compare one driver to another. Then we go into exactly what you're saying with it depends. Well, very clearly, we can actually have what we call a baseline. And we can say, okay, you're either on the baseline or you're above or below the baseline, in whether that's brake release, throttle application, steering angle, any of these things, right? And that's the beautiful thing right now in the past, 10, 15 years now, that has really come about, that makes it so much more simplistic instead of bench racing, right?
Well, and I will challenge with every good, there could be a little bit of bad. And so a couple of points. One is, if you hop in my car and you go and set a datum lap, and I get in and I copy you, haven't I learned how to copy you? Or have I really learned how to do something? And I think that kind of only very quickly going, I'm just going to copy you. Sure, it's going to lead to me getting faster, copying what you're doing, but is it a long-term fix or a short-term fix? And sometimes it can be a long-term if in the process I learn what to do and why you're doing it. But if I'm only just copying, and I kind of go, hey, I need Tom back in my car to show me how to drive again. So I think there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely a valid point. And it goes back to your original, and our first comment was everybody has a different style. And so, if someone's new to the sport and they don't have a style, well, whether they hire a coach or they just start to drive and it's trial and error, that is how your style is starting to generate, right? And you're absolutely right. And I think it's important, the point you make, that sometimes having someone drive your car is just good in the sense that, okay, there's more potential left in the car. You don't necessarily have to emulate every single input that other driver does.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so then the other thing is, you kind of, and I don't want to sound like the old geezer here, but okay, I'm on the older side. But you can't help but go, did Mario Andretti have a data system? Did Jackie Stewart have a data? Did Ayrton Senna have a data system? No. I mean, these drivers learned how to sense what the car needed. And sometimes I think if we rely on that stuff too much, we don't force ourselves to learn how to sense what the car needs. And so, and I'm not saying, I'm a big proponent of using data and video and in the tools there, but I think only relying on them, I think you're missing some of it.
Huge. Absolutely. And I really like something I've heard you say many times before is drive the track, drive the car, drive the limit of what you see or what you feel, not thinking in your mind, hey, I needed to brake at this marker and I needed to get on the power at this exact point. Drive what the car is giving you or what the track is giving you. And that is more in line with what you're saying here, with not about the data and notes. It's more about the feel what's going on. And I think that's huge.
Yeah. And it's also the hardest thing to teach somebody, isn't
it? It is.
And maybe this, I didn't mean this, but a segue into, what have you learned from coaching? Because you're doing a lot of coaching. What have you learned from coaching that has made you a better driver?
Yeah, good question.
Or maybe has it made you a better driver?
I don't, it's funny. I've had this conversation with a couple other coaches before, and sometimes you just need to turn the brain off.
Yes.
Sometimes. And so if you can explain every single microsecond of what's going on with the car and analyzing yourself so much, sometimes you can slow yourself down. Sometimes. And so I've learned as a coach that sometimes I don't need to overanalyze myself so much, and I just need to go fuel the car and go drive it. And I would say that leads me into my final point that I'll make later when you ask me what my one tip is.
Okay.
Because this ties in exactly to what my latest mentality is with coaching and what I've seen in driving.
Okay. Well, I can't wait for that. But a couple other things is you mentioned that there was a point in my driving career where, for budgetary reasons, I was doing less racing and more coaching / instructing. And for two reasons, I think, I kind of got caught up in my reputation as a instructor is I've got to be precise. I've got to be accurate. I can't make mistakes. And, my instructing reputation is on the line here if I throw it off the track. And then the second part that you talked about is I started thinking too much. And there was a point in my driving career where I think that hurt. And it only got to the point where I started to realize that I just need to let go and just go back and trust myself and just drive. And I think, that's maybe even a bit of a driving style. Like, you think about drivers, there are some drivers who are very analytical drivers. There are some drivers who I don't think they have a clue what they're doing. And then there are some that are in between those two. And I'm not saying that any one of those are right or wrong. They're just different ways there may be more different mentality styles.
100%. And you hit on so many great points in those comments, but I feel very similarly with sometimes overanalyzing and being self-critical with your own driving so much that, you're not even thinking about, okay, big deal. I make a mistake, right? Just push, 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 and get the most out of your own driving. But then there's also this piece you talk about where if you don't go if you don't push the car enough or you push yourself enough, you start to kind of fall into this just, I don't know, this circle of, okay, you don't go out and expand beyond that that point of comfort, that comfort level. And if you're being so analytical, you're not leaving enough bandwidth over just left to just feel the car. Just feel what's going on. If you're thinking so much, well, I got to do this, I got to brake here, I got to remember this, you're not leaving enough mental bandwidth left just to feel what's going on.
Well, and I see that a lot in, the track day world, the HPDE world, where there's such an emphasis on you got to drive the right line. And I've said this many times before, but who taught you that line? Or why do you drive the line you do? Well, because Bill or Sally told me to. Well, why does Bill or Sally teach that line? Because Fred or Kathy told, so it kind of, there's this line that gets passed down the generations thing. And how many drivers stop and think or don't think, as you pointed out, and just go and drive and go, what is the car telling me? If I ask somebody, why do you drive the line that you drive? And they go, because that's where the car wants to be. Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Absolutely. I've had someone tell me before it's a specific manufacturer line. For instance,
yes.
it's the Porsche line around the track.
It's always the Porsche line. Yeah. Yeah. Or it's the front wheel drive line. Yeah. And on one of my podcasts that Colin was on, I asked him the question of, the differences between different cars. And he goes, and I can't remember exactly what his words were, but essentially it was, hey, at Road Atlanta, I've driven open wheel formula cars. I've driven prototype cars. I've driven a NASCAR Cup car. I've driven front wheel drive showroom stock cars. I've driven GT cars, and I drive pretty much the same line in all of them. And I drive the same way. So I think it has more to do with a driver's driving style than it has to do with the car. And, oh, by the way, he'd driven Porsches in there too.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of fun to be had with thinking about that, because I've actually been fortunate to drive a TCR program in 2018. The first year at TCR was in IMSA, and Rick Casey Jr. and I won a championship that year with that. A lot of fun that year. But I realized that driving that high horsepower front wheel drive car was a lot like driving a high horsepower rear wheel drive car, because you're grip limited in the corner when you're trying to apply the throttle, right? So it was a lot of fun to kind of, like you say, adapt your driving style to realizing, well, there's similarities between cars that are completely different because of XYZ, right? So neat.
Well, yeah, and the difference between front wheel drive Mazda 3 TCR car and a rear wheel drive Mustang versus a rear wheel drive Porsche versus a rear wheel drive mid-engine prototype car. They're all different, but it still comes down to your braking, steering, and accelerating, I guess.
Right. Last point I have for you on, you mentioned Road Atlanta, and we're talking about my driving style and about entry speed and that's my style, right? So I go into turn one and I'm thinking in the prototype, right? Thinking, all right, maximum entry speed, maximum min speed in turn one, no matter the car. You go into three and you could argue similar things, and then you get around the track and you get to turn six. Apologies for anybody who doesn't know Road Atlanta, but turn six is very similar to one in that you have banking and very fast corner. But then you get to turn seven and you got to change your mentality. And it's so easy to have that same mentality of drive the entry, get the entry speed, like turn one and turn six and all that, even turn three, right? But you got to shift your mentality for seven. And I've overlaid data time and time again to try to play with this. And if you actually almost underdrive the entry a little bit and you can maximize the exit, it just starts paying dividends down the back straightaway. And it depends on other things, of course, but it's a lot of fun. Like you talk about driving styles and things like that. That's one that comes to mind.
Well, it's interesting because that corner particularly and other corners, what's interesting about Road Atlanta is turn 7 has a different rhythm than that whole other first half of the track, right? You're in this big, fast, flowing kind of stuff, and then it's stop, turn, go. And very different rhythm. And, and I think that's why, you see some drivers who are really, really good at some tracks and not so good at other tracks is they tend to drive most corners the same way. And I think drivers like yourself, Colin, Tristan, you can hop into anything and go fast because you've learned how to adapt. You've got 86 different ways to approach a corner, and you just got to go, which one am I? I'm going to use number 47 here, right? That's a cool thing, I think. And somebody listening to this, hopefully they're going, maybe I need to become more adaptable and try different things and experiment and learn to try different things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. We've had teams where we have 3 or 4 drivers at Road Atlanta, and one of maybe the drivers who isn't as quick has a better turn 7 than the rest of the team.
Right.
Because, he's thinking, I'm going to underdrive the entry a little bit. I'm going to get the maximum exit, and it just pays dividends all the way down the straight. It's fun, like you said. And by the way, I only thought there was like 3 different corner types. I didn't know there was 86.
No, it was 86 of them. I counted them one day. No,
that's right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would be interesting to kind of really think about how many different techniques or ways that you can approach one particular corner. There's different ways you can do that. But Tom, I think that would be too analytical, and we've decided that if you're too analytical, you just got to feel it, and maybe that's part of it. So to wrap up, because I'm dying to get back to this last thing, I want to ask you, what is your one piece of advice for people listening? What's your speed secrets of the day?
And you're going to laugh because it's a simple one.
I like simple.
Not complex. But I have come to the realization that we've always had here. But tying into what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, more quality seat time is always going to pay dividends.
I thought it was I just need more seat time.
There's a Q word in there, quality. And I have been working, again, fortunate to be working with different folks recently, and I see a huge difference in their performance when they're maybe doing some simulator time before they get to an event, just to really get the rhythm of the track. And you could argue if that's quality or not, but they're getting some time there.
Mm-hmm.
And then doing some practice, whether it's at the track before their proper event they're coming to or what have you. And if they can get the right scenario, they are making strides, big strides. And I feel like even at our level, my level, anybody's level, if you can have more quality seat time, more testing time, there's no way that's going to hurt your driving.
So, keeping it simple, can you define the difference between quality and like good quality and poor quality?
That's a good question. I think that depends. I'll use the it depends, but a little bit of potentially depends on the experience of the driver. A newer driver, seat time is seat time, like a newer driver, right? But a very advanced driver, the quality, maybe that depends on the type of car. That depends on the setup of the car. If it's the right car, but it's set up completely poor, that probably isn't going to help that driver if it's a very advanced driver, right? If they're getting ready for an event. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I would define the difference. I mean, seat time, yeah, just getting seat time is important up to a point where if you're repeating and just doing the same thing over and over again, either it's not the right thing, so practicing the wrong thing isn't going to help you. But the other thing I think is the more specifically, the more well-defined what you're working on, I think that's quality. Because even, I'm just going to go and turn 40 laps. Well, if you're not really working on anything particular, you might not improve much. But if it's like, okay, I'm going to do 4 10-lap sessions, and this first 10 laps, I'm going to work on my brake release. And then I'm going to work on next 10 laps. I'm going to work on turning the steering wheel more, so defining what it is you're working on, I think is critical to the level of quality.
Going right back to the goals, got to set goals. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very critical. But, and it's funny you say that, because there'll be a practice session, in any scenario. If I'm one of the drivers, 6-7 laps go by, maybe even 3-4 laps go by, I'm good. I need to come in, make a change, put a new driver in, whatever. If it's a new track, it probably would be change drivers, mentally think about it, get back in. Or if it's trying to get the car faster for that track, come in, let's make a change, right? It's all relative for each driver. But as you said, just going and knocking out a 40 lap session it gets to be a little bit almost unproductive, right?
Yeah. And boring, right? Because driving on a racetrack, that's boring. Not. Yeah. Hey, Tom, thanks so much. I love these kinds of conversations, thinking about driving that way. And again, not thinking about it too deeply, because you need to let go at some point. But I love this kind of conversation and talking about different technique styles, that kind of stuff. And, you're somebody that I admire in terms of your ability to get into anything and go fast, but not just drive fast, but you know how to win. And, there are drivers who are really fast, but they don't seem to win that much. And there are other drivers they're maybe not even the fastest driver around, but they figured out how to win, and you've figured out how to go fast and win. So I admire that in you, Tom, and your ability to then go and coach other people as well. That's, it's one thing to do and another to be able to teach it too. So how do people follow you, get a hold of you, learn what you're doing, that kind of stuff? What's the latest in following Tom these days?
Well, I appreciate that, Ross. It's an honor. I always looked up to you, and I appreciate all those very, very kind compliments. As far as following me, so I write a weekly blog on Facebook, on my Tom Long Racing Facebook page, it's just a lot of fun. Sometimes it's more of a diary, and sometimes it's got a lot of good little nuggets of information there for driving tips and so forth. But it's a weekly thing I keep up with. It's good time. And social handles and so forth are at Tom Long Racing. So, and tomlongracing.com website.
I'm curious, one more question, just because you said that. Do you find that writing helps you understand what you're doing better?
1,000%. It's just like helping your child with homework. It's like bringing back the memories. I remember how to do this now. But yes,
how's that going there? Are you learning arithmetic again?
That's it. But yeah, absolutely right. If you can explain something and teach it, then I think you're very, very thorough in understanding the subject.
Yeah. Well, there's another topic for another day for us, Tom. Thanks so much again for being on the show. And I know I'm going to see you at a track here pretty darn soon. So as always, keep learning and having fun.
Always a pleasure, Ross. Thanks so much for having me.
Need something to identify yourself as a serious competitor in iRacing? Something to wear when you are laying around the house or hanging out in the garage? Or even better, something to prove to all your friends at the track that you know what you're doing? Well, Ross has the gear for you. Go to speedsecrets.com/gear to check out the t-shirts, polo shirts, and hats. Show off that you're part of the Speed Secrets team. Go get them. Have some fun.